So much. I will share a couple of slides and I'll put my screen up. But before I do that, I just wanted to carry on from the introduction that Vidya, ma'am, you just did, which is that this is definitely a time where entrepreneurship is a great way for especially kids coming out from college. And been 20 years since I graduated, so all of you look like kids to me. But I guess what I wanted to do was, while a lot of people will talk about uh, the expertise that you need to bring in to really to succeed in this area of entrepreneurship. I just wanted to bring in how companies would essentially go into the area of engaging with you. And I'm just going to go through a couple of slides to put through my points of view through. So if I could share my screen, if that's all right. Is that possible?
I think, Vikramji, yes, you can share yourself as well.
Sure. Awesome. That'll be great. Thank you. So let me just see if I can. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can.
Awesome. So the idea was to talk through some of my learnings over the last 20 years of working on how to understand what are the things that will make you succeed in the whole area of entrepreneurship through seeing my friends, through going through my own journey. And I'll use this concept which I had learned in my school called conceptual clarity and contextual familiarity, which kind of helps me always understand a new concept or any concept that I want to try and get a little bit of understanding about. So I'm going to split this into two parts: conceptual clarity. And the idea that I want to talk about is what is entrepreneurship and the types of entrepreneurship that you could essentially explore. And I'm going to use the concept of business to business marketing because that's what I have primarily been doing in the last 20 years. So while the examples that Yachana talked about in terms of the work I have done, I've primarily been working with companies which essentially engage other companies as their key go-to-market objective. And that's what I'm going to use as a context to kind of explain some of the topics that I would want to bring to your attention. Yeah. So that's what I essentially want to do. And to just kind of explain what I mean by this is that when you think of yourselves as going out into this particular market in whatever way, shape, or form you're trying to think of your career, be it as an employee or as an entrepreneur, the idea is that you have an offering and you're trying to monetize it. Those are the two key things which are required to essentially create a career, be it as an employee or any other form of creating a career out for yourself. And the point essentially is that the relationship between offering and monetization essentially comes with its risk and reward. And the greater the relationship, you are an entrepreneur, the lesser the relationship, you are an employee. So as an employee, you have your offerings, which is your skills, your capabilities, which you're essentially handing over to the organization to monetize, and you're getting your rewards against it. With a lesser amount of risk because your employer is essentially taking over the risk of monetizing it. Whereas as an entrepreneur, what you're doing is you're essentially taking your offering and monetizing it. So you own the entire risk and the reward. And that's the difference essentially in terms of what an employee versus an entrepreneur essentially means. You not just have the service or the capability that you're bringing to the market, you're also trying to monetize at the same time, right? And flipping it around from a different perspective and trying to think of how companies think of engaging different resources or different people who are available to provide these services to them. There's this whole story of frequency of task and complexity of task, which they essentially analyze any service through and identify where they are able to reach out to employees or entrepreneurs to essentially enable them to provide that capability to the market. And the way they essentially analyze this becomes into a very simple 2x2 matrix of uh, low versus high frequency of task and low versus high complexity of task. A low complexity of task with a low frequency of task, something which you have to do only once in a while and is a very easy task, you're essentially going to outsource. Similarly, some of the more complex tasks, but something which you might do only once in a year, maybe, for example, is something you're going to, again, outsource or find outside people who can support you with that. Whereas something which is a lot more frequent, you would definitely think of bringing in-house and creating your own capabilities around it. If the task is essentially a very simple task, you are trying to create efficiency and effectiveness, trying to create the cost benefits which can help you have a price differentiator in the market. Whereas if it's a complex task, you're going to use that to create a USP or a differentiator for yourself in the market in terms of how you stand different from any of the other providers out there. And that's essentially the strategy that companies take in terms of how they engage with the audiences that they are trying to engage with. And the reason you need to understand is because once you understand this, you figure out where you can play your services or your offerings or your capabilities to be able to maximize your capability, be it as an entrepreneur or an employee. In my case, as an employee, but in your case, all of you who are thinking of being an entrepreneur, it's about understanding where these opportunities arise for you to be able to fully provide the right kind of service and monetize it. Yeah. And what I'm going to do is now talk about the various kinds of entrepreneurship and how different players have essentially used that understanding to really succeed in the market. So one kind of entrepreneur, a solopreneur, someone who essentially works on their own, providing their own services to different organizations, usually not trying to create a large business, but working on their own to essentially provide the capability or offering that they have in the market. Some good example would be if you're a thought leader, for example, or an influencer or a niche service provider, you are able to provide that complex task, which is maybe required only once. A good example, and I have some examples here, is say, for example, Simon Sinek, who you guys, if you have been on LinkedIn, would have seen, is a huge thought leader in the space and is able to monetize the capability of organizational motivation into a way to be the solopreneur that he is. Similarly, you could be doing a task like a PR management, for example, or Tom, for example, is one of the leading providers of LinkedIn social selling, a very, very niche task. But by doing that, he's essentially a solopreneur who has a very flourishing business that he's essentially using and running for the last 15 odd years. The lady on the left here, someone who I have known as a client who was the head of marketing at AIA in Singapore. Now she heads or rather provides her own PR and brand management capabilities to different organizations, again, as a solopreneur. So it's about understanding the services you can provide by identifying the areas of work that companies are trying to outsource and being able to fit your services in there. And sometimes this area of service gets kind of seen as being not so glamorous, but do understand that, for example, a lot of companies are essentially targeting these so-called digital nomads or freelancers. And in this COVID-19 times, there are countries which have essentially created new freelancer passes to uh, really attract these kind of players who can essentially be based anywhere. So this digital disruption allows you to be based in India or any other place that you want to be and be able to provide the service to different organizations. So that's a benefit that this particular space of work brings to you. The other another kind of entrepreneurship that you can think of is being an entrepreneur, as in being in a company but still having that entrepreneurial spirit to drive a new service or offering. And some of the services you could essentially look at is, for example, how to take some of the efficiency and effectiveness that the organization is building and use that to create a new offering, or look at the differentiator or USP of the company and use that to develop a new service or offering that you can again take to the market. And there are some great examples of people who have succeeded. The two people on the right are people you would obviously know about. These are people who were leading their own business units and were successful enough to become the CEOs of the organization that they essentially work for. And each of all is a story which I think all of you guys should, if you don't know, should get acquainted with. A great story to know about how I.T.S essentially took their supply chain capabilities and truly disrupted the market in terms of farmer to market connectivity. The last bit is obviously what everyone knows as an entrepreneur. I'm not going to define that, but essentially here you're looking at all the products, services, or solutions that you would want to provide in the market. And here are some examples of entrepreneurs who have done really good. And the reason why I have chosen these people are these are all people who are providing software as a service as the key offering to the market and have been hugely successful in doing that. And again, that's where the digital disruption comes into play, where you are able to identify how digital capabilities are to be used to convert what a company had to invest in majorly into a service offering and therefore de-risk the organization's go-to-market capabilities and use that to your advantage. Some great examples here, Freshworks, for example, that Girish is leading, or HubSpot as a product. Again, something which you might not have heard of because it's not as glamorous, but from a business perspective, all of these companies are multi-billion-dollar companies at the moment. Yeah. So the point of all of what I just talked about is that you should be able to understand the returns and the risks that you're essentially going into with the different types of entrepreneurship that are available, and use that, as I said earlier, to chart your own path. And that's what I wanted to bring out today in this particular conversation. And with that, I would want to stop my conversation pretty much at the end of the time. Any questions, comments, discussions that we wanted to have, love to take that up before I hand it over to the next speaker.